All right, here we are, Philadelphia. The debate is happening tonight. We are in, I don't know, some little side center that they shunt the media into to keep us all placated and to keep us running around like little lemmings. I'll try to avoid getting too immersed in the media pack mentality. One funny thing about these debates is that there's tons of foreign media, conventions too, and they really have no clue what they're doing. No offense to them, nor should they. Like, I mean, if I went to Australia, there's an Australian lady doing some kind of social media video right near us right now. Get her. Get a good look at her. She seems fine. She might be from New Zealand. I don't know. Sounds Australian to me. But like, I mean, if I were covering Australian politics, unless I did a really deep research dive, I'd be kind of out of my element as well. And yet here they are. And so we just bore witness to a giant mob of journalists that surrounded Anthony Scaramucci, who was press secretary for Trump for 12 days in 2017. And he's the big Kamala Harris surrogate now. And he was being swarmed by journalists as though he were the King of England, maybe even above the King of England, because he's a Republican who has denounced Trump. And so there's not really a whole lot to do right now other than just kind of mosey around looking like we're doing something important, which we're not. So I figured I would just do this little intro video because, you might want to get a little bit of a behind-the-scenes peek at where the media have been relegated to. And even identifying as media, I have some reservations about. So here you see, I guess this is ABC with their setup, and maybe CNN, or all the people who can afford to spend, I don't know, $10 million or something on having their dopey little remote studio set up. And then if you want to pay just $1 million or something, you can get one of these smaller little setups. We are not well endowed enough financially to afford one of these. But then again, do we really want them? I mean, I don't see the added journalistic benefit. Oh, there's Scaramucci. Looking very important. Look like he's a hot commodity. We could probably interview him. I mean, he's being ushered around like he's the star of the show. It was embarrassing. I mean, I felt like I would be disgracing myself and you, the viewer, if I joined that massive scrum of reporters that encircled him as though they were hanging on his every word. So I mean, most of what the journalists are doing here. I mean, we overheard one NPR reporter saying, "Excuse me, I'm going to be on air in a minute." So we had to move from her table, and her report was like, "We are here in Philadelphia, which, as you might know, is the capital of Pennsylvania, a key swing state." And that's the big NPR report. And they just recite the most banal, conventional wisdom imaginable about expectations for the debate. What does Kamala Harris have to do? What does Donald Trump have to do? We all are familiar with Donald Trump, but we're maybe not quite as familiar with Kamala Harris. Therefore, what do they each respectively have to do? So what do I have to do? That's a better question, maybe. I don't know. I guess we'll hang around here for the next several hours, and we'll maybe do a little bit of trolling, have a little bit of fun, have some laughs, have some tears, and and then once the surrogates are funneled into this spin room. So I guess you can demarcate the spin room versus the media filing center based on the color of the carpeting. That's my understanding. A lot of really intense logistics went into that. They're C-SPAN. I mean, they're the only ones who I don't resent. I actually genuinely do appreciate C-SPAN. So I even got a C-SPAN T-shirt and sweatshirt recently. Partly because I wanted the T-shirt and sweatshirt, but also because I wanted to just contribute to C-SPAN, because I use tons of their content without compensating them. So there's your little, civic responsibility note. And yeah, we're overrun with journalists who are just staring into the computers doing God knows what. They could be home, I guess, instead of here, but you have to be here because that makes you a serious journalist. Or something, right? I don't know. You tell me. So what does Kamala Harris have to do? What are you expecting? What does Donald Trump have to do? What are you expecting for his performance? Those are the utterly forgettable questions which will be repeated over and over again today and will have no lasting news value or informational value whatsoever. So that's the fate that we've been beset with, all for your edification and for my eternal dismay. And yeah, ABC News. These are the first debates. I mean, this actually is somewhat notable. These are the first debates, meaning tonight's debate hosted by ABC News, then the one in June hosted by CNN, which led to Biden being unceremoniously dumped from the nomination, that have been organized not by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which for decades had been the intermediary between the media organizations and the campaigns to host debates, but by the actual media company itself, in this case ABC News, and then the two respective campaigns. So I don't know. I mean, people talk about how corporate media is like on the decline. I don't really get the sense that that's true based on the dominance that corporate media has asserted over the debates this cycle. So yeah, there you go. Oh, and there's Byron Donalds. Maybe we'll go chat with him. All right, that's it for now. Sorry, goodbye. So, in April, you voted for the National Security Supplemental Bill, including the Israel funding component. Obviously, the Biden-Harris administration strongly promoted that. There are people on the left or progressives who wanted to see a shift in Israel policy. Some even had aspirations that maybe Kamala Harris would break to some degree with Biden on the status quo. But she, in her first interview a week or two ago, said that there would be no difference whatsoever between her policy approach to the Israel-Gaza war and that of Joe Biden. Are there people who might be deflated to hear that within your coalition, or what do you make of that dynamic?
Look, I think what's important is, I think first, the vice president has been really clear about her position, which is she has been working with the president for a ceasefire and a release of the hostages. That has been consistent with the president's position, the White House this entire time, and she's been consistent in that as well. But what I will also say is, if you have listened to any of her speeches, the way that she has met with activists and advocates and folks that are involved in this issue on the ground, I think she's also showing an important willingness to listen, to uplift those voices. And I know that she is doing everything she can every day to ensure that this war ends. And she, knowing her, the kind of person she is, I know that what's happening over there is impacting her like it's impacting all of us. It's horrific, and she wants it to end.
But as much as she might listen, that doesn't necessarily correlate to a policy difference, right? Which is what the advocates are calling for, and that she wouldn't even allow, her and the DNC didn't even allow a Palestinian American to speak at the convention.
Well, let's be really clear. Her policy position is aligned with the president. That's absolutely correct. But let's talk about Donald Trump. You have someone that actually called for a Muslim ban. You have somebody who his allies are talking about building real estate in Gaza. You have somebody who has disrespected Muslims in the Arab community, who has basically said and told Netanyahu in publicly that he can do whatever he wants, and he'd let him do whatever he wants. So the difference is very clear. I understand that there are going to be people with differences. I get that. But there is no reason why anyone that honestly believes in this war to end shouldn't be voting for Kamala Harris, because Donald Trump is going to allow Netanyahu, quite frankly, to do whatever the hell he wants. Well,
there are plenty of Trump surrogates around here, so I'll be sure to ask them about Trump's policy. I want to hear about Kamala Harris's policy from you, though, since you're a co-chair of her campaign. She has said that she has indicated, it's hard to really get that clear of a statement of policy from her, but she's indicated that she would not rescind any of the weapons shipments that have been going to Israel. So can we just expect the status quo to be perpetuated, where however much she listens to activists, or however much she claims that she wants to see the war end, if you're still supplying endless armaments to Netanyahu's government in Israel, then the war presumably is not going to end, correct?
Look, I think two things. I think one is, in speaking for the campaign, I think that her position has been clear. She wants an end of the war, a ceasefire, and it wants to ensure the hostages are released.
What about the weapons shipments?
Well, her position has been the same as the president's. I think she's been clear about that, and so she will announce her policy positions. As it relates, though, to voting in this election, and I think you hear this, and I hear this, by the way, from activists on the ground, from folks in the community, there is a clear difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump on this issue. And so,
well, what's the difference, really? I mean, the Biden administration has sent more armaments to Israel than any administration ever.
A huge difference. I mean, you have someone who believes in a Muslim ban, who says incredibly racist things about not just that community but other communities, and who's committed, I believe, to allowing Netanyahu, who's a government that I personally don't support and I think is horrific, a blank check to do whatever he wants. And so I think there is a clear difference on that issue, and there is a clear difference on many issues. And so, but on this issue, let's be crystal clear, she wants the war to end, and she wants a ceasefire, and she wants to release the hostages.
One final question. So Secretary Blinken said today that the U.S. is not going to rule out authorizing Ukraine to use U.S. munitions to strike even farther into Russian territory. That could potentially pose some escalatory risks. I don't know what your position is on that. Is that another issue where the status quo is just going to be perpetuated by Kamala Harris, even though we take these gradual steps up the escalatory ladder? I mean, are you in support of authorizing Ukraine to strike potentially Moscow with U.S. munitions?
Well, I mean, first, that's not a position that Ukraine has taken to the United States. So just to be clear,
well, Ukrainians are lobbying for that permission.
The United States is not taking that position, and so
Blinken said today they're open to it.
I mean, the United States is not taking that position, and that issue haven't come before the Congress, and I don't imagine it would. But what I will say is that the Vice President's position on Ukraine has also been clear. Her foreign policy has been to support the president and the White House as vice president. And so her foreign policy in Ukraine is that she understands that Putin is a danger and that the Ukrainian people need the support of the United States. And she's been very clear about that.
So Joe Biden is last one. Joe Biden has engaged in no direct communications with Vladimir Putin since the war started. However much we might dislike Vladimir Putin, don't you want world leaders, especially those who preside over massive nuclear arsenals, to engage in communications? And would Kamala Harris retain that policy of zero communication?
I'm going to trust President Biden, who I think is probably the most consequential president that we've had in the modern era and understands foreign policy almost better than anybody. And I trust his judgment, and especially the way that he's going to treat and work with Vladimir Putin, who is a dictator.
All right, Congressman Garcia of California, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Senator Scott Worth Rumble. Can we have a quick minute with you? Hey, how you doing?
Hi, what's your name?
My name is Michael Tracey. This is Megan.
Okay,
hi. So today, Secretary Blinken said that the Biden administration is considering allowing Ukraine to use U.S. munitions to strike even longer range targets inside of Russia. Is that prudent in your mind? And how would the Trump administration, a future Trump administration, handle questions about what constraints to impose or not on Ukraine?
Well, first off, I think everything that Biden and Blinken and Harris have touched is a disaster. If Trump was president, Putin wouldn't have invaded Ukraine. If Trump was president, Iran wouldn't have had all the money. So the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas wouldn't have the money and the resources, and Hamas wouldn't have invaded. If Trump was president, I don't think we'd have all the problems we have in Latin America. So I think what Biden, Harris, and Blinken need to do is decide: do they want Ukraine to win or not? They've held back weapons. They've tried to run the war. So if they want Ukraine to win, let Ukraine win. If they don't want Ukraine to win, stop giving them weapons.
And looking forward, I mean, we can look in the past and say whether a different approach might have prevented the war. But looking forward to a potential second Trump administration, would there be fewer constraints imposed on Ukraine involving questions like this? Would that be your preference?
Well, it's up to one person. That's up to Donald Trump.
Right, but like, what insight do we have in terms of what his policy approach would be there?
I think you'd have to ask him.
I'd love to.
If you look at his record, we were not at war when he was president, and so he did a variety of things to get us out of war.
Well, he did arm Ukraine, right? And that was one of the big grievances cited by Putin as to why he even went to the war in the first place. The U.S. was sending lethal arms to Ukraine.
Well, if we weren't at war, okay. First off, Putin didn't invade when Trump was president. Okay. This all started with the Afghan debacle right after Biden became president and Harris became vice president. So I mean, we'll have to see what happens when Trump wins. But I mean, what Biden has done has been a disaster. It's for Ukraine, for Iran, for Israel. You just look at the world's a more dangerous place because of Biden-Harris plan.
So Trump addressed a gathering of the Republican Jewish coalition last week. Miriam Adelson introduced him. She's spending a lot of money on this campaign. I think a minimum of $100 million. What is her agenda, if you want to put it that way, with regard to a second Trump administration? What are her policy priorities, and what is she looking for Trump to give her with her investment of that amount of money, which is pretty staggering?
I think it's pretty clear Trump was the most pro-Israel president in the history of this country. Miriam Adelson is somebody that believes in, supports Israel. And if you look at Trump, look at all the problems that Israel's having right now. None of them happened under Trump. It all happened under Biden and Harris. And so she wants a president that's going to support Israel.
Support Israel is kind of a cliche, though. I mean, what specifically would that mean on a tangible level? Would she want the U.S. to authorize Israel to maybe annex the full West Bank? There are some people in Israel who call for that.
I think it's real simple. Don't support Iran. Don't appease Iran, which caused all the problems, and support Israel.
On Iran, very quickly, and I'll let you go. The Trump administration had this policy of maximum pressure on Iran, imposing.
They had that policy, and it worked.
Well, it didn't work if the objective was ultimately to change the Iranian government, right? And that seems to be what a lot of people would prefer to ultimately happen. It created a lot of immiseration within Iran. The economy obviously was very damaged by that. In Iran, could import lots of goods, even for medical supplies. So would we expect sanctions to be used as prolifically in a second Trump administration as in a first? And Biden continued many of those sanctions. I know you quibble with how vigorously he enforced them on the oil exports.
Iran has so much money right now because Biden didn't enforce it, and that's why Hamas had the money to go into Iran. Why the Houthis, still shooting? They're shooting at Americans, and why Hezbollah is shooting rockets into Israel. I mean, it's all because Biden, Harris have had this appeasement policy towards the Ayatollah. When Trump wins, I hope he has maximum pressure against Iran.
All right, thanks a lot, Senator Scott. Governor, I spoke to you in July, and you said you had total confidence.
Says they're live and producers taking my head off.
Governor, I spoke to you in July, and you said you had total confidence in Joe Biden's ability to retain sole authority over the nuclear codes until age 86. Do you still believe that?
Joe Biden's doing an outstanding job as President of the United States.
Anthony Scaramucci, with all due respect, weren't you the press secretary in the Trump administration for like 12 days or something? 11. Sorry, exactly. Comms director, excuse me.
I was on the campaign for 9 months. I raised probably $30 million, gave him $1 million personally. I was on the executive committee for the transition team. So I worked on the campaign for almost a year.
But why does that pedigree? My question is, why does that pedigree make you such a valued surrogate for the Kamala Harris campaign? Like, with all due respect, like, why do people care?
You should ask them. Well, you're standing here talking to me, so
I'm indicting myself, I guess.
You might be indicting yourself, but I don't know why they care. But let me tell you something. I'm helping her. It's resonating. It's been effective with independents. We're building a very, very broad coalition. Mr. Trump represents something to me that's very anti-American. It doesn't stand for the traditional values of the Republican Party that I grew up in.
Like which values?
Well, you want to name one. Okay. Ronald Reagan was pro-immigration. His last speech that he gave was a pro-immigration speech. Mr. Trump is anti-immigration, not just illegal immigration, but immigration overall.
He granted protective status to Venezuelan immigrants, so it's selective.
Read the agenda. Read the 902-page agenda. Read Agenda 47. Read Project 2025. Go through the stuff that he's talking about. He's a divisive guy. He blows racist dog whistles every single day of his life. He splits things. I worked for him. I know the MO. He'll say one thing that's very racist and very dog whistly, and then I'll say a second thing to countermand it so that there'll be enough meat out there for people like the talking heads of Fox News to say, oh, he didn't really mean it.
Did you get a chance to say hello to Donald Trump? He was just in the room.
I didn't see him, no. But I'm happy to say hello to him. I have nothing personal against him. I just don't want him to be the president of the United States.
So Kamala Harris tonight touted the endorsement of Dick Cheney. Is he one of these traditional Republicans who people are looking back on retrospectively and valorizing?
I think it's a very important endorsement for Vice President Harris because this guy's calling her things like Marxist and communist and comrade. And a guy like Dick Cheney is not endorsing her if any of those things were true. And so what we know about Mr. Trump, he's a lie machine. He told 30,450 lies.
So why is Dick Cheney endorsing her? Do they have compatible worldviews?
Well, incompatible enough. Remember, Dick Cheney, like myself, is a first principles person. So what are you looking for?
What's the principle? Invading Iraq?
No, you should let me talk. If you're like a right? What are you, like a right wing journalist, right? Hard right? I got that. That's all right. But let me talk. First principles about the Constitution. First principles about freedom. First principles about where we are, what our identity is, not only to ourselves as Americans, but what our identity represents to the world. Those are first principles. Mr. Trump's a very destructive guy. He's very denigrating to the country. He goes to these rallies and he denigrates our country. Okay, that's the country of my parents and my grandparents. I don't like it very much, and I want him to stop. The way he's going to stop is we're going to defeat him.
Do you find it bizarre that skepticism of Dick Cheney is coded as right wing in 2024? Like, I guess I'm old enough to remember the early 2000s where that would have been a punchline to a joke.
The world has changed over the last 25 years. I think that this guy represents a systemic danger to our system. He's got people on his team, and he himself has said this. They want to take the FBI out of the Department of Justice and link it directly, have it report directly to the president. He wants to fire 50,000 employees in the government and then rehire people to take a loyalty test to him. These are things that the average American looks at and say, I don't want that. Okay, and so for me, I don't want my country turning into an autocracy where 5.7 billion other people are living in an autocracy. And Mr. Trump represents that. Mr. Trump denied the election results last time. His worst moments tonight when he was trying to substantiate the great election lie that his friends at Fox News lost $783 million on. So, it's a disaster. You got a guy who has 40 people that work for him, including his vice president, that have told you under no circumstances can we work for, endorse, or vote for him. 40 people. Let me ask this to you rhetorically. Let's say we all worked at a pharmaceutical company and a pill was being made, and we saw the pill being made in the factory, said, hey, that pill's going to kill your kid. Are you going to take the pill? You have people on his campaign that are telling you how destructive he is and what a threat he is to the Republic and our Constitution.
But if those people include John Bolton, Mark Esper, who was a former top Raytheon lobbyist, others, I mean, if you're a little bit circumspect about the influence of like the military-industrial complex, wouldn't it be a point in his favor that those people have such negative view of him?
I understand you have a tinfoil hat on your head.
What tinfoil hat is what conspiracy theory did I assert?
Because you're asserting something.
Was Mark Esper not a top Raytheon lobbyist? Trump. It was to his discredit that Trump appointed him defense secretary.
Mark Esper served the country. He was
as a Raytheon lobbyist.
No, he didn't. He was in the American Army.
He wasn't a Raytheon lobbyist.
I think
he was the top lobbyist at Raytheon when Trump appointed him.
Lots of different things in his resume, including working for Raytheon.
I still don't follow what conspiracy theory I asserted.
No, you're implying that the 40 people that work for Donald Trump are in the tank of the deep state and the.
I didn't. You said the term deep state, not me.
Ask one more question. Let's go to something else. Sorry.
All right. Here's another. You don't know my MO. You thought I'm a right wing because I expressed skepticism of Dick Cheney.
So I know the moves.
Well, I'm not a Republican. I've been a registered Democrat. So I mean, final question. And maybe this is too conspiratorial for you, and maybe it shows I'm wearing a tinfoil hat, but did Dick Cheney and George W. Bush uphold the Constitution such that they're now a venerated, favorable contrast with Donald Trump? Explain that to me.
Well, I think it's prima facie. I don't even think that needs to be explained.
Did Bush and Cheney upheld the Constitution?
They certainly did.
Really?
They certainly did.
Fascinating.
And they may have made a mistake going to that.
What about the Fourth Amendment?
They went to the UN and created that war. What are you implying? The Patriot Act?
Well, no. There was mass warrantless surveillance that was inaugurated under George W. Bush, 2006.
Well, first of all, you have to go to a judge to get the warrants. Second of all, read the
kangaroo court, the FISA court.
Here we go with the tinfoil stuff.
I could cite you endless constitutional scholars who will talk about the kangaroo court of FISA courts.
Disagree with the stuff, but the law got voted in by the Congress. It's called the Patriot Act. You may not like the law. Then get yourself elected and go raise a caucus of people and get out of the law. Vote to renege the law. We may not like the law, but the law got put into place, and there is a process to protect people. I want my family safe. You know what? I work for the American government. I understand the threats that are out there to the people of the United States, and I want my family safe. And I like Bush and Cheney. That's just me.
All right. Well, I guess,
Fellow Democrat.
Yeah, exactly. Congressman, Kamala Harris tonight touted the endorsement of Dick Cheney. Did you find that at all bizarre? Is Dick Cheney someone who's fit to judge the competence or character of a president? I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Dick Cheney was reviled by Democrats, rightly so, because he was integral in launching the Iraq War on false pretenses.
Dick Cheney is certainly competent to judge the one issue that matters, which is the preservation of our democracy. And look,
Why is he fit to judge that?
because he is supporting Kamala Harris, because she actually supports democracy, unlike Donald Trump, who you saw tonight, still can't handle the fact that he lost the election. He's willing to upend our democracy, put lies into people's heads that somehow this election was stolen. And look, Republicans and Democrats disagree on...
Democrats used to accuse Cheney and Bush of stealing the 2000 election. So how is he in a position to make this judgment to the extent that Kamala Harris is going to tout her on a national stage before the biggest audience she's ever spoken to?
Dick Cheney is putting country over party on the one issue of democracy. So Donald Trump incited an insurrection to try to stop the certification of the Electoral College. I was there on January 6th. I was one of the co-authors of the article of impeachment against Donald Trump because he is a traitor who does not believe in democracy, and he still can't handle the fact that he lost the election. And you cannot be president of the United States if you don't respect the one issue that matters to America, which is our elections and respecting the peaceful transfer of power. That is why Dick Cheney endorsed Kamala Harris. I'm sure he doesn't agree with her on the overwhelming majority of issues, but that one issue is so paramount because it's the fundamental nature of our country. It is our democracy.
Do you still think Donald Trump colluded with Russia?
His campaign absolutely did, and
Him personally?
his campaign manager admitted he gave private, sensitive Trump campaign information to the Russians.
It was polling data that anybody could have Googled.
False. It was not.
It wasn't private and sensitive. It was polling data, which was nonsensical.
Why is Trump's campaign manager giving information to the Russians? Just even think about what you're saying. Why are you defending his act of giving information to the Russians? Why is he even talking?
Paul Manafort wasn't even charged with. Why wasn't Paul Manafort is who you're talking about? He was not charged with colluding with Russia. Mueller could have charged him with that, correct?
He admitted it. You know what Mueller said?
Why didn't Mueller charge him?
Mueller said the Russians systematically interfered in the elections in a sweeping manner.
Why didn't he bring a single criminal charge against a Trump associate?
You a lot of time, so thank you.
I think it's very productive, actually.
Yeah, it's great.
Why don't you think it's productive? Why don't you think it's productive? Hello? You interrupted, so now I'm going to ask you the question. Congresswoman, tonight Kamala Harris touted the endorsement of Dick Cheney. Did you find that at all strange? I mean, I'm old enough to remember the 2000s when Dick Cheney was integral in launching the Iraq War on false pretenses. Would it seem funny for a Democrat down the line to tout his endorsement? Does this mean they have compatible worldviews?
What it means is that today's Republican Party no longer resembles the Republican Party of the past. This has
Launched the Iraq War?
This has become the Trump Party. And I think the point she was trying to make was that people who are fleeing that party are fleeing it because Donald Trump is such a threat to national security. He's such a threat to the Constitution. He's a direct threat to our futures as Americans.
Did Dick Cheney uphold the Constitution?
I think her point was that people are fleeing the Republican Party because Donald Trump is such a threat.
Would you welcome the endorsement of Dick Cheney?
I am here to support Vice President Harris and Governor Walz, and I'm excited about a new generation of leadership that's going to turn the page on Donald Trump.
Can I ask you a quick question about Ukraine? Today, Secretary Blinken said that the U.S. was open to potentially authorizing Ukraine to use U.S. munitions to strike even deeper into Russian territory. Kamala Harris didn't address that directly tonight, nor did Trump for that matter. But does that raise any concerns with you? I mean, isn't that a step up the escalatory ladder? Is there anything that Ukraine will not ultimately be authorized to do?
You know, I did not hear that, and I try not to comment on issues that I haven't directly heard about yet. I've been traveling here. We had votes today. As soon as I catch up on that news, would love.
In May, the Biden administration did authorize Ukraine to strike targets somewhat closer to the border with Russia. So you're familiar with that.
I am.
And what are your thoughts on that? Is that seem like it's a prudent policy?
I supported that decision.
Why?
We are seeing the aggression by Russia continue to escalate, and I think it is prudent for Ukraine to respond in kind.
Using U.S. munitions?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Senator, tonight Kamala Harris touted the endorsement of Dick Cheney.
She did.
Did you find that at all bizarre? Would you welcome the endorsement of Dick Cheney? Am I the only one who remembers that he was integral in launching the Iraq War on false pretenses? Is that all been memory hold now?
She's trying to win an election, right? And in winning an election, you're trying to build a coalition that's as big as possible. So it is important that there are a whole bunch of Republicans, many of them who worked very closely with Donald Trump, who having seen him up close, are convinced that he is deeply unqualified to do the job. So I do think it's important that there are a host of people who disagree with Kamala Harris on policy, but are supporting her because they believe that the election of Donald Trump would mean the destruction of our democracy. It just, I think, solidifies the stakes of the election.
But do Dick Cheney and Kamala Harris really disagree substantively? They seem to have fairly compatible foreign policy worldviews from everything I heard from Kamala tonight.
Yeah, I think they disagree significantly.
On what?
Seriously? On what?
Yeah, what do they disagree on?
I mean, did Kamala Harris support the Iraq War that Dick Cheney started? Did
She wasn't in public office at the time. She may well have.
she support giving unfettered subsidy to the oil and gas industry? So you asked me for some examples. I gave you some.
Senator, Kamala Harris tonight touted the endorsement of Dick Cheney, who I'm sure I don't have to remind you, so you're smirking. I had a similar reaction, I have to say. Integral in launching the Iraq War on false pretenses. This was Kamala Harris's biggest audience of her career. Very important to how she's being introduced to the American people. And she's choosing to cite the endorsement of Dick Cheney. Didn't you find that bizarre?
What I found that the vice president was able to do tonight was to introduce herself to the American people. What I found is that she was able to articulate her vision for the future of the country. I found that she was able to talk about the support of people who are different than her, who think about the world very differently than she does, as a demonstration of how we need to unite our country and move our country in a direction where all Americans can see themselves and their families doing more than just surviving but thriving.
Would you welcome the endorsement of Dick Cheney?
I would. I think that, again, what the vice president was doing tonight was talking about how together we have more in common than what it is that separates us, and that together we have to build a pathway for our country for all Americans.
She also denounced Donald Trump for fitfully and in a flawed way brokering some sort of negotiation with the Taliban, saying, oh, he negotiated with terrorists. That's another cliche from the Bush era. Do you think it was wrong to try to come to some sort of settlement in the Afghanistan war, which Joe Biden culminated when he withdrew U.S. forces in 2021? So what did you make of that exchange?
What I thought the vice president, again, was trying to communicate was that the role of this country and the commander in chief in global situations around the world is one that has to be taken very, very seriously. And there are ways that needs to be done with the kind and taken seriously with the kind of character and integrity that is expected of the president of the United States. And she was offering an example where she thought that could have been done differently. And
she objected on principle to the very idea of Donald Trump negotiating with the Taliban.
I didn't hear it that way, so maybe we just had a different interpretation of what we saw tonight.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Congressman, Kamala Harris tonight touted the endorsement of Dick Cheney. That was one of the few people whose support that she touted. John McCain, or she invoked the legacy of John McCain, people associated with George W. Bush, Mitt Romney. On Dick Cheney in particular, like I'm old enough to remember the Bush years. I know you are. You served in the military in that era. What does it tell you that Dick Cheney's worldview is apparently compatible enough with Kamala Harris's worldview that she's going on her biggest national stage of her career and touting the endorsement of Dick Cheney? Did you find that bizarre?
No, what this is about is who's fit to be commander-in-chief, who actually will respect and support the Constitution of the United States.
How is Dick Cheney fit to determine who's fit to be commander-in-chief?
And that's why the coalition, the folks that are surrounding and supporting Kamala Harris is very broad. Because, all the policy issues that we're debating tonight, at the end of the day, there's only one candidate there, and that was Kamala Harris, who respects the Constitution, who respects the rule of law, and won't continue to deal in big lies.
Did Dick Cheney and George W. Bush respect the Constitution and rule of law? I remember mass warrantless surveillance being inaugurated under that administration.
It's very clear that this election is about who can actually respect the rule of law, and that is Kamala Harris. You have in Donald Trump somebody who has repeatedly undermined the rule of law, dealt in conspiracy.
Didn't Dick Cheney undermine the rule of law?
And then actually moved his supporters to attack the U.S. Capitol.
Senator, Kamala Harris touted tonight the endorsement of Dick Cheney. If memory serves, you lost your leg in combat in Iraq in a war that Dick Cheney was integral into launching on false pretenses. So if you want to claim that Dick Cheney now is putting country above party or what have you, all right, I'll take that point, I suppose. But don't you find it a bit bizarre that Dick Cheney is one of the few people whose endorsement that the Democratic nominee touted at this debate?
Well, she touted many endorsements. She also talked about all of the retired generals, all of the people, the former Trump, the people that worked with Trump who said, hey, we've worked with this guy. He is clearly unfit to be president of the United States. He is unfit to be commander-in-chief. He disparages our troops. He has no respect for our military men and women, their families, and he is incompetent as a leader of the greatest nation on the face of the earth.
What about Dick Cheney?
Clear. Well, again, he's one of the people who has come out, and it's Liz Cheney as well. But bottom line is that.
Yeah, and what do you make of her touting his endorsement?
I think when somebody like even Dick Cheney says that Donald Trump is not fit to be president of the United States. That says something about how low Donald Trump.
But what's it say about Kamala Harris? So, Mr. Kennedy, back in May, you said that Donald Trump had contributed to exacerbating tensions with Russia, had bragged about arming Ukraine. Do you stand by those criticisms?
I said it during my speech in Arizona why my opinions about Donald Trump have evolved, and a lot of that evolution came during a series of conversations where we spoke particularly about the Ukraine and about what he intends to do, and it gave me a lot of confidence that he's going to end the war immediately.
But he hasn't stopped bragging about arming Ukraine, has he? I mean, Trump never stopped bragging about arming Ukraine, has he? He repeats that to this day, hasn't he? Senator, there was a moment when Donald Trump referenced the deal that was brokered between Mike Pompeo and the Taliban in 2019, 2020. And Donald Trump effectively said that his intent apparently was to renege on the deal or claim that the Taliban had violated the provisions of that deal and therefore maintain a U.S. force presence in Afghanistan. Does that mean that the war effectively would have not ended if Trump had won a second term?
Donald Trump's point was that he negotiated a deal through Mike Pompeo that the Taliban did renege on. There's a brand new report out. It goes hundreds of pages that shows how they reneged on it. He said he showed a picture of the Taliban's leader's house to him. Why? The message was, we know where you live. We will kill you if you harm the hair of a single American soldier. The exact opposite of what Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have done.
So U.S. troops would have remained in Afghanistan under Trump, receiving incoming fire, rocket attacks on Bagram Air Base, and so forth?
The Taliban, like most other foreign leaders, would have been afraid to renege on their deal with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump certainly wouldn't have left all those people behind, left all those weapons and equipment behind either.
Senator Graham, tonight Donald Trump said that Israel would cease to exist if Kamala Harris was elected. Hasn't the Biden-Harris administration supplied an enormous amount of munitions to Israel? How would it cease to exist if Kamala Harris gets in office and continues the same policy?
The biggest threat to the Jewish state is Iran, and they've let Iran run wild. They were broke, they were in a box, and they relieved the sanctions, and the root of all evil in the Mideast is Iran, and these folks have let Iran run wild and has threatened the very existence of the Jewish state. If the Iranians get a nuclear weapon, I think they will use it. I don't think they're going to stop unless somebody makes them stop, and they're not worried about Biden.
Senator Scott, really quickly, tonight, watch out, sorry. Tonight, Donald Trump said that if Kamala Harris were elected, Israel would cease to exist. How could that be the case if the Biden-Harris administration has supplied such an extraordinary amount of munitions to Israel?
Actually, I'd say the reverse of that is actually true, that the Biden administration has slow-walked the resources necessary for Israel to have already won the war, number one. Number two, the first tweet that came out, the first communication that came out of the White House on October the 7th was actually telling Israel to stand down. I would rather have a president who stands strong, firm, and completely on the side of right and standing with our greatest ally in the Middle East, Israel. That did not happen under the Biden-Harris administration. So,
sorry. Yeah, we're fumbling around. So
it was clear that the fact of the matter is Donald Trump has been a strong, clear supporter of Israel, and thank you. And Biden-Harris have been, thank you, tepid in their support.
So would Trump remove any of the constraints that the Biden administration has imposed on Israel? Michelle Lujan Grisham, correct? Thank you. First try. Didn't even have to Wikipedia the pronunciation.
I don't know. They would given you the right pronunciation, but
you can't trust Wikipedia. I know that from experience. So we're about 6 weeks since Kamala Harris was effectively named the Democratic nominee. She's given a total of one extended television interview. You do many national television interviews, despite being, governor of the southwestern state. That's not always front and center in American consciousness.
That
I'll try. I love New Mexico.
Front and center.
Well, lots of movies get filmed there nowadays. Tax credits, right?
You got it. And a lot of important historical things have happened in my beautiful, great state. Watch Oppenheimer.
Isn't that true that the oldest church in the United States is in New Mexico? I forget the name now, but it's like a
San Miguel Mission, and it's right there in Santa Fe. And we were being governed a mere 200 years before the Pilgrims loaded onto the Mayflower. So we're a state with a long, robust history. And frankly, something that people probably don't know is that Spanish is our official language in New Mexico.
That. Okay. And there's also a Las Vegas in New Mexico, which people should be more familiar with.
They should. It's not the entertainment capital in that way, but it is a beautiful northern New Mexico rural community where one of half my Hispanic family is from, Romeroville.
Well, the question I did want to ask you was, Kamala Harris has done a total of one televised interview. It was a joint interview with Tim Walz. She's been effectively the Democratic nominee for 6 weeks. Don't you find that bewildering?
I don't, and I'll tell you why. First of all, you all, thank you, are covering every aspect, and we expect that and we want it. We want people to be able to get their sources of information from a variety of sources. And two, in a campaign, in a close race, where should you be? On the campaign trail, meeting voters where they are, telling your personal stories, knocking on doors, having rallies, making phone calls. She is doing the real work that we need. And I don't think it's an indication of anything other than this is a very short, abbreviated window, something we're not used to in this country. You campaign for 2 years. I campaigned for governor in a state where I report 12 generations, because I can prove that.
I'm sure you talked very frequently with media, correct?
I was mostly on the campaign trail.
But you talked to media. I know that. I followed you.
Yeah, but I was also on Capitol Hill. And there's a gaggle of media that is out my front door all the way to my walk to the Hill. This is not the same situation. So I think I would make the same decision. I know what it's like when people need to be, hear from you. They want you to respect them enough to be at their front door. She's doing the campaign work, and I fully expect that you and others will have a lot more time. And given that I'm in a fight to get her in the White House, I'm expecting you to be on the front lawn talking to her often.
I would love to talk to her. We haven't gotten the chance. Could you perhaps facilitate that?
Well, I'm going to facilitate that by getting her into the White House.
Okay, and quickly on immigration, obviously a big issue. The Republicans have made that one of their primary attack lines against Kamala Harris. I don't know if you want to say that she was border czar. That's kind of a made-up term, but she was designated by the Biden administration early on in this term to preside over issues involving, I guess, the root causes of immigration. So does she bear any responsibility for the massive influx of migrants that have come over the border, as you well know as a border state governor?
Well, those crossings are down, so I want to make sure.
But they were massively up in the first portion of the Biden administration.
Well, they were massively up in the Trump administration. He wants them.
Not by as much.
Well, because he was taking babies out of the arms of their mothers. You want a chilling, disgusting effect. He wants concentration camps. He wants mass deportations. He's not into.
What do you mean concentration camps? Because that has a strong connotation.
It does, but I mean, if you look at Project 2025, I read that to say that if you're going to do mass deportations, I'd like to understand exactly what that means. And my connotation and frame of reference is that this is heinous. Go back to the vice president. She wants a bipartisan border deal. Trump killed one when I was in Congress. I was the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. He ripped away protections for Dreamers. He has no interest in a bipartisan deal. He wants to sow fear and hate in America. And it is another remarkable reason I stand.
But last question, what about addressing the root causes of these massive migrant inflows that come from South and Central America, such as in Venezuela, where the Biden administration has maintained the Trump administration's sanctions regime, thus driving people out because they're in desperate economic conditions?
Have to have a congressional investment and strategy to do any of that. But she has, in fact, I think, and if you went to the Latin America meeting in LA, I think there was a lot of movement about the kind of economic opportunities that we could do if we could get Congress on board. And I believe she can get that work done.
All right. Thanks, Governor. Are we rolling? Okay. Yeah, I'll leave it in. What the hell? That basically sums up my reaction to tonight's debate. Just a really disgusting, phlegm-infested disaster of a cough. That sums it up. Yeah, so we're here. I guess it's past midnight at this point. We're still hanging around the spin room. I try to bring a no-spin room mentality, or a no-spin mentality like Bill O'Reilly once did, to the spin room. Ask the questions that I think ought to be asked of both Republicans and Democrats. I had a good time asking lots of Democrats about Kamala Harris touting the endorsement of Dick Cheney, which, I mean, would have bewildered any Democrat 10, 15, 20 years ago, but now it's just something to be valued and esteemed, evidently. Did get to talk to a decent number of Republicans as well about some of the more dubious foreign policy, largely prescriptions of Donald Trump. But I really do have to say, and though I usually am not inclined to declare a winner or a loser of a particular debate, I will say that Kamala Harris, in my judgment, was the automatic loser of this debate just by invoking the Dick Cheney endorsement, because if I didn't say that, I would be betraying like my 16-year-old self. Donald Trump, I would say, was like a secondary loser, just for like babbling about Israel and, weirdly claiming that Putin killed millions of people in Ukraine and all this other kind of stuff. But yeah, the big loser, the one who takes the big L on the forehead to me was Kamala, and to a lesser extent Trump, but they both lost in my judgment, and so did we as an American public. So for now, from Philadelphia, the city of not brotherly love tonight, the city of brotherly anger and frustration, farewell.